All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Jackson Howell Show. Good to be with you. I had put out a video a couple of days ago that I was going to release an episode on January 20th, which would be the 1-year mark for President Trump. However, life, work, everything else got in the way, was not able to get it done. That's okay. It's just how things go. We just keep rolling, keep pushing forward, keep getting back up and keep going. So we will cover on today's episode a spiritual thought from the scriptures, a thought from the 5,000-year leap on America, the founding fathers, a little brief discussion on the national championship game, and then finally some thoughts on the 1 year since Trump's inauguration on his second term. Got a little interesting way of doing that coming up. So starting out, scripture of the day from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Be one flesh. What does that mean? Can they literally combine and become one with another? The same person? No, they cannot. So how can they become one flesh? They can become one in unity. Another way of looking at is they have the opportunity to procreate and create another human being. So genes from the man, genes from the woman, and they combine and create another human being, one flesh. Another way is in their ideas, their thoughts, their beliefs, which is huge. If you and your wife do not believe the same way spiritually, politically, morally, you're going to naturally have some conflict and some things that will be roadblocks in your relationship. So for those of you out there that are looking to get married, some very important things to think about as you are searching for that wonderful spouse to spend the rest of your life with and hopefully eternity. And that is spiritual beliefs, moral beliefs, which are kind of one and the same, political beliefs, and some financial beliefs and principles that you live by. And then, of course, who are you rooting for on Saturdays and Sundays? That's a big one as well. But, yep, a man shall leave his mother and father and find a woman and marry her and cleave unto her, and together they become one. So for all those marriages out there, good luck. Hope you're working on things. If you're struggling through things, go to Heavenly Father in prayer, seek his guidance, and he will bless you in your efforts. Next thought from the 5,000-year leap from Cleon Skousen. This will naturally flow into the discussion that we will have today on the 1 year, 1 year since Trump's inauguration for his second term. All right. The founders' political spectrum. Part of the genius of the founding fathers was their political spectrum or political frame of reference. It was a yardstick for the measuring of the political power in any particular system of government. They had a much better political yardstick than the one which is generally used today. If the founders had used the modern yardstick of communism on the left and fascism on the right, they never would have found the balanced center which they were seeking. So what is left and what is right? It is extremely unfortunate that the writers on political philosophy today have undertaken to measure various issues in terms of political parties instead of political power. No doubt the American founding fathers would have considered this modern measuring stick most objectionable, even meaningless. Today, as we mentioned, it is popular in the classroom as well as the press to refer to communism on the left and fascism on the right. People and parties are often called leftist or rightist, the public do not really understand what they are talking about. The terms actually refer to the manner in which the various parties are seated in the parliaments of Europe, which is where we ultimately came from. The radical revolutionaries, usually the communists, occupy the far left, and the military dictatorships, such as the fascists, are on the far right. Other parties are located in between. Measuring people and issues in terms of political parties has turned out to be philosophically fallacious, if not totally misleading. This is because the platforms or positions of political parties are often superficial and structured on shifting sand. The platform of a political party of one generation can hardly be recognized by the next. Furthermore, communism and fascism turned out to be different names for approximately the same thing, the police state. They are not opposite extremes, but for all practical purposes are virtually identical. So, oftentimes, what we see as left and right is muddied by Democrats, Republicans, and what their ultimate aim is and outcome is. And unfortunately, the political parties are driven by ultimately greed and get in the way of solving issues for whatever reason. So, a little bit about the national championship game, Indiana versus Miami. I had Indiana winning by 14. It was a much closer game than what I had anticipated. Pretty good game. Watched most of it. But the story, I think, coming out of this thing is the Mendoza story, quarterback for Indiana Hoosiers, and him being from Miami. And then playing at Cal, and then ultimately transferring and playing at Indiana. I believe he came out of high school as a 2-star recruit, and then the story with his mother with MS and the struggles that she has, and then just the ultimate praise that he gives to our Savior Jesus Christ and his honoring of his parents, specifically his mother, calling her his hero, as she was his biggest fan growing up and basically still is. But I'm sure everybody has seen the clip out there with 4th and 5. He took the ball, ran it, put on some moves, powered way past the first down, which they needed, and then ultimately into the end zone. And crowd going crazy, commentators going crazy, and then the shot of his mom and dad there, and his dad putting his arms around his mom to kind of help her control herself with her MS issues there. So just a beautiful story, one for the ages. So congratulations, Indiana Hoosiers. Great job. I think that was our first bowl win since 1991. So 16-0, quite the season. Congratulations. All right, moving on into Trump's inauguration. 1 year since his inauguration, and I did something that I considered would be a little fun or a little interesting to look at. What I did was I took AI and I used Grok for this, which tends to be, I think, the most resourceful and accurate in reporting and finding sources and everything. But basically, I asked it to give a summary in 4 different ways. One, as a leaning conservative and what he was happy about in Trump's first year, a leaning conservative and what he's not happy about in Trump's first year, and then the exact opposite, a leaning liberal and what it's not and what it's happy about in Trump's first year, and then a leaning liberal and what it's not happy about. So I will share those here with you, and I've got some summaries. I'll be reading from the screen here, and I'll read through it. I may skip around a little bit, but just some interesting insights here. All right. As a leaning conservative, what this individual might have been happy with about Trump's first term. Again, this is AI generated from Grok. I'd give President Trump's first year and his second term a solid thumbs up overall. It's been a refreshing return to America first priorities that deliver tangible wins for everyday folks, even if not everything went perfectly. Here's a quick summary of what stood out positively to me based on the key accomplishments that align with conservative values like secure borders, economic freedom, energy independence, traditional principles. Border security and immigration. This was a home run. Trump delivered on his promise to seal the border, with encounters dropping a whopping 92 to 99% from the chaos under Biden, ending catch and release, reinstating remain in Mexico, and kicking off mass deportations, over 600,000 formal ones, plus millions of self-deporting, finally putting an end to the open border nightmare, designating cartels as terrorists and passing the Lake and Riley Act to detain criminal migrants. That's protecting American families and sovereignty. Music to conservative ears after years of unchecked influxes straining resources. Economy and tax relief. The One Big Beautiful Bill signed on July 4th was a massive win, making the 2017 tax cuts permanent, eliminating taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security benefits, plus new deductions for seniors and Trump accounts for kids. Tariffs brought in 90 to 200 billion, with spurring 7.6 trillion in investments and onshoring jobs. Gas prices down to around $2.90 a gallon. Egg prices slashed, and deregulation saving billions. That's pro-worker, anti-inflation action that puts money back in the pockets without bloated government spending. Sure, some job sectors dipped, but overall, GDP growth at 4.3% in quarter three shows the economy roaring back and under less red tape. Energy independence and deregulation. Record oil and natural gas production, 24.2 million barrels a day, while ditching the Paris Accord and UN green mandates. This unleashes American energy dominance, lowers costs for families, and rejects globalist climate hysteria that kills jobs. Pulling back regulations across the board saved 5 to 180 billion and attracted big investments like Apple's 500 billion pledge, proving free markets work when government's out of the way. Foreign policy and national strength. Brokering ceasefires in Gaza, the India, Pakistan, and elsewhere, the Indian and Pakistan conflict, and elsewhere, plus freeing 50 American hostages and pressuring NATO allies to pony up 5% of GDP on defense. That strong deal-making leadership without endless wars or apology tours. Destroying Iranian nuclear sites and capturing Maduro to secure oil access shows backbone against threats. Hosting leaders like Putin might ruffle feathers, but it's pragmatic diplomacy that puts U.S. interests first, not multilateral weakness. Cultural and government reforms. Ending DEI nonsense across government, military, and schools, banning transgender service and gender-affirming care for minors, protecting women's sports under Title IX. Finally, some sanity against woke overreach. Slashing the federal workforce by 228,000 to 300,000 via DOGE initiatives, defunding NPR, PBS, and Planned Parenthood, and pardoning January 6 defendants. That's draining the swamp and defending constitutional rights. Declassifying the JFK and MLK files adds transparency, and making English the official language reinforces national unity. In short, Trump's first year felt like a course correction towards self-reliance, security, and values that built this country. Approval might be mixed due to economic bumps and legal fights, but for conservatives, it's proof that bold action beats status quo bureaucracy. Looking forward to year number 2. So again, that is as if you were a leaning conservative looking at Trump's first year. That might be how you felt about his first year. All right. So as a leaning conservative, what are some things that you might disagree with during his first year? Again, Grok AI generated. As a conservative leaning voter, while I appreciated a lot of the bold moves in President Trump's first year of his second term, there were some real frustrations and disappointments that left me shaking my head. It's not that the agenda was off track. America First is still the right path, but execution fell short in spots, especially where promises met reality or got bogged down in bureaucracy and legal fights. Economic hiccups hit working families hard, and some unfulfilled pledges on peace and fiscal discipline grated on my values of limited government and accountability. So here's a rundown of what didn't sit well with me based on the outcomes we've seen. Economy and fiscal responsibility. This is where I felt the most let down. Trump promised to end inflation and make everything affordable again. But while some prices dropped, like gas and eggs, overall households' costs crept up. Electricity bills jumped 9%, and tariffs ended up causing net manufacturing job losses of about 58,000. Non-college workers, the backbone of conservative America, saw employment dip by 361,000 overall. The deficit ballooned by another $2 trillion amid all the spending and tax cuts, which flies in the face of fiscal conservatism. I get that tariffs are meant to protect jobs long term, but the short-term pain felt like a raw deal for blue-collar folks, and it didn't deliver the full manufacturing superpower turnaround as we were sold. Not having energy or electricity prices as vowed, that's a broken promise that hurts families in my neck of the woods. Immigration and border, not going far enough. The border wins were huge, but the full wall isn't done yet, and legal challenges stalled things like restricting birthright citizenship. Mass deportations are rolling, but they're not the largest in history, as scale promised. With reports of family separations and custody issues, at least 34 deaths, raising concerns even among us who want tough enforcement. It feels like we could have pushed harder without the court roadblocks derailing momentum. The foreign policy shortfalls. Trump's deal making got some ceasefires like Gaza and others, which is great, but no resolution to the Ukraine-Russia mess. The war drags on, and we didn't get the day one into conflicts. Strikes on Iran and drug boats might show strength, but reports of civilian casualties and potential war crimes worries me as a conservative who values moral leadership and avoiding unnecessary entanglements. Failing to snag Greenland. That was a pie in the sky idea anyway, but it highlighted overpromising. Hosting folks like Putin is pragmatic, but it sometimes comes off as too cozy with authoritarians, which doesn't align with promoting freedom abroad. Government reform and overreach issues draining the swamp was a highlight, but the longest government shutdown in history over budget battles was a mess. Disrupted services for no good reason. Ethics rollback led to fresh corruption allegations, which erodes trust in the very reforms we're cheering. Implementing chunks of Project 25, like reproductive restrictions, despite public denials, felt sneaky. And while I support traditional values, the approach risked alienating moderates we need for lasting change. Plus, not fully axing agencies like education, just restructuring left some big government holdovers intact. In the end, as a conservative, my gripes boil down to unmet expectations on the economy, hurting everyday Americans, fiscal bloat contradicting small government principles, and some foreign domestic pledges stalling out. Approval ratings dipping, down 9 points on key issues, show even the base is restless. Trump's got the vision, but year one reminded me that DC resistance and real world economics can blunt even the best intentions, hoping year two ramps up and delivers more freely. All right, so those are your two conservative examples from Grok AI. If you're conservative, this is how you may have felt about the positives and the negatives on the year one Trump administration. All right. Shifting to if you are liberal leaning voter, how did you view Trump? What did you see as a success in this year one? Says, as a liberal-leaning voter, I'll be honest, President Trump's first year in his second term was tough to watch from my perspective, with a lot of policies that felt like steps backward on social progress, inclusivity, and environmental protections. That said, even in a challenging administration, there were a few bright spots where actions aligned with values like peace, public health, transparency, and even some economic relief for everyday people. These aren't enough to sway my overall view, but credit where it's due for outcomes that benefited broader society or reduced harm. So here's a summary of what I appreciated from through my lens. Foreign policy and peace efforts. One of the standout positives was the brokering of ceasefires in multiple global hotspots like Gaza, India, Pakistan, the DRC, Rwanda, and Armenia, as Azerbaijan. Apologize on the pronunciation there. As someone who values multilateral diplomacy and reducing violence, seeing these temporary halts to conflicts, even if not full resolutions, likely saved lives and opened doors for humanitarian aid. Freeing around 50 American hostages was a humanitarian win, too, showing effective negotiation without escalating wars. Pressuring NATO allies to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP could strengthen collective security if it leads to more equitable burden sharing, though I'd prefer it tied to progressive goals like climate resilience. The health and public well-being initiatives. Trump's Make America Healthy push had some elements I could get behind, like phasing out harmful food dyes and additives, which promotes safer consumer products and public health, aligning with liberal calls for stronger FDA oversight. Increasing research into medical marijuana is a step toward evidence-based drug policy reform, potentially helping with pain management and reducing opioid reliance. Expanding access to IVF, in vitro fertilization, was a surprising pro-family move that supports reproductive choices, even if it came amid other restrictions. Drug price negotiations, saving billions through executive action. That's a direct win for affordability, echoing Democratic priorities like those in Inflation Reduction Act, helping seniors and low-income folks without waiting for Congress. Economic relief for workers. While the tariffs and tax cuts were mostly regressive in my view, eliminating taxes on tips and overtime provided real relief for service workers and hourly employees who are often the most vulnerable. The senior deductions and efforts to lower some everyday costs like gas dipping to 2.9 gallon and egg prices falling offer tangible help amid ongoing affordability struggles. Attracting investments and some onshoring could create jobs in underserved communities. If done right, though, I'd like to see more focus on green manufacturing. Transparency and accountability measures. Declassifying files on JFK and MLK assassinations added a layer of government transparency that's long overdue. Liberals have pushed for this for decades to uncover historical injustices. Slowing fentanyl inflows through pressure on Mexico and China addressed a public health crisis without solely punitive measures, potentially saving lives from overdoses. Freezing university funds over anti-Semitism issues, while controversial, aimed at campus safely, which resonates if it protects marginalized groups without overreach. Overall, these pockets of progress, especially in health reforms and diplomatic ceasefire, showed moments where the administration delivered on practical, people-focused outcome that transcend that transcend partisanship. But they were overshadowed by regressions elsewhere, leaving me hopeful for more bipartisanship in year two rather than fully satisfied. As a liberal, I'd love to see those build upon my equity, with equity in mind. And then finally, this is where, if you are a liberal-leaning voter, or you might have disagreed with President Trump's administration during his first year. Says it felt like it was a disheartening rollback on progress toward equity, environmental justice, and humane governance. While there were isolated positives, the overarching direction amplified divisions, harmed vulnerable communities, and prioritized ideology over evidence-based policy. It eroded trust in institutions and left me worried about long-term damage to democratic norms and global standing. Here's a summary of what troubled me most. Immigration and border policies. The aggressive crackdown was brutal and inhumane. Mass deportations, over 600,000, and millions self-deporting, led to family separations. At least 34 reported deaths in custody, and widespread fear in immigrant communities, echoing the worst of his first term. Ending catch and release and reinstating remain in New Mexico might have dropped encounters by 92 to 99%, but it treated migrants as threats rather than people fleeing peril and ignoring root causes like climate, displacement, and poverty. Attempts to restrict birthright citizenship felt like an attack on constitutional rights, and the whole approach prioritized walls and enforcement over comprehensive reform or pathways to citizenship. Economic policies and inequality. The tariffs and tax cuts exacerbated inequality. While some relief, like no taxes on tips, helped workers, the broader impact included manufacturing job losses, 58,000, a dip in employment for non-college workers, 361,000 overall, and rising costs in areas like electricity, up 9%. The deficit exploded by $2 trillion, burdening future generations, and promises to have energy prices are fully in, inflation fell flat. Household affordability remained a crisis for the low-income families. This America First protectionism felt like a giveaway to corporations. Example, $7.6 trillion in investments skewed toward big players at the expense of consumers and global trade fairness. Energy and climate rollbacks. Withdrawing from the Paris Accord and UN climate pacts while ramping up fossil fuel production to record levels of 24.2 million barrels a day was a devastating blow to environmental progress. As someone who sees climate change as an existential threat, this deregulation ignored science, accelerated emissions, and abandoned international cooperation, putting future generations at risk for short-term energy gains. It reversed hard-won steps towards sustainability, favoring polluters over clean energy jobs and planetary health. Foreign policy and ethical concerns. The unilateral strikes on Iranian nuclear sites and drug boats raised serious war crimes, alarms with reports of civilian deaths, and undermining America's moral authority. No resolution to the Ukraine-Russia war, despite promises of quick peace, prolonged suffering abroad, cozying up to authoritarians like Putin, though authoritarian diplomacy eroded democratic alliances, and failures like not acquiring Greenland highlighted erratic priorities. Even ceasefires, while welcomed, seemed more about photo ops than lasting justice, especially in places like Gaza, where humanitarian needs went unaddressed. And then cultural and social regressions. Ending DEI programs across government, military, and education, banning transgender military service and gender-affirming care for minors, and defunding Planned Parenthood felt like targeted attacks on marginalized groups, rolling back protections for LGBTQ plus rights, reproductive freedom, and diversity, implementing elements of Project 2025, reproductive restrictions despite denials was insidious, threatening women's autonomy. Protecting Title IX in women's sports came at the cost of inclusivity and freezing university funds over anti-Semitism, while important risks stifling free speech on campuses. Government dysfunction and accountability. Slashing the federal workforce by almost 300,000 might appeal to anti-bureaucracy folks, but it disrupted essential services and expertise. The longest government shutdown in history over budget fights was needless chaos, and ethics rollbacks fueled corruption allegations, further eroding public trust. Pardoning January 6 defendants politicized justice and restructuring, but not fully eliminating agencies like education left education policy in limbo, potentially harming public schools. In summary, this year deepened polarization and setbacks on issues I care about deeply: human rights, climate action, and social justice, leaving 58% of Americans viewing it as a failure. Approval ratings tanking on priorities like the economy reflects widespread discontent. As a liberal, it reinforced my beliefs in collaborative, compassionate leadership. And here's hoping for a course correction or checks in year 2 to mitigate the harm. So there's a general overview if you were a leaning conservative versus a leaning liberal, what you liked about his first term, what you didn't like about his first term. And if you listen closely, there were a decent amount of overlapping issues that actually ended up lining up with each other. From the economy, everybody wants a strong economy. We just disagree on how we get to a strong economy. You know, what do you have to sacrifice? What needs to be the priority? For example, strong economy requires inexpensive energy or lesser cost in energy. And where's the sacrifice in green energy versus fossil fuel energy? It's always going to be a debate between conservatives and liberals. So anyway, I thought it was just an interesting exercise using AI and seeing kind of where liberals and conservatives line up in how they view President Trump's first term. So, and again, these are leaning conservatives and leading liberals, not your far left versus your far right. They're never going to come together and see eye to eye and kind of be able to overcome differences of opinion to work together. So anyway, there you go. Hope everybody is doing good out there. Hope you're staying strong, looking and achieving goals. Until next time, y'all keep on striving.